This morning, Denmark's Prime Minister has praised the people of Greenland for their resilience amid mounting pressure from the Trump administration to take control of the semi-autonomous Danish territory.
And the world needs us to have Greenland, including Denmark. Denmark has to have us have Greenland.
While much of the world remains transfixed by the great power struggle between the United States, China, and Russia, a quieter yet strategically seismic shift has been unfolding in the Arctic. Canada, a nation often dismissed as a secondary player in global politics, has chosen a path that is neither loud nor aggressive, but one that carries enormous consequences for the future of the North. In early 2025, Ottawa finalized a $3 billion mining agreement in Greenland, a move that instantly redrew the geopolitical map of the Arctic. Unlike Washington's blunt talk of annexation or Moscow's reliance on military projection, Canada's strategy has been lean, deliberate, and focused on cooperation. And in doing so, Canada has not only surprised its rivals, but positioned itself as a power whose influence cannot be ignored. The announcement landed against a backdrop of renewed U.S. pressure on Greenland. It was only a few years ago, in 2019, when then-President Donald Trump stunned the world by casually declaring his desire to purchase the island from Denmark. The idea was widely mocked as absurd, dismissed as a real estate fantasy dressed in geopolitical clothing. Yet when Trump returned to the White House in November 2024, the dream resurfaced, this time with greater determination and fewer attempts at humor. By March 2025, in a fiery address to Congress, Trump's tone had shifted markedly. No longer did he speak in terms of negotiation or mutual benefit. Instead, he declared bluntly that Greenland should fall under U.S. control, describing the island's resources as vital to America's national security. The message was clear. Washington wanted Greenland one way or another, but while the White House postured, Ottawa had already been working behind the scenes. For Canada, the Arctic is not a novelty, it is home. The North is woven into Canadian identity and sovereignty debates, particularly surrounding the Northwest Passage. Canadian companies, backed by European investors, were quietly negotiating agreements with Greenland's government, identifying opportunities that aligned with both Greenlandic aspirations for economic independence and Europe's hunger for critical raw materials. By the time Trump declared Greenland essential to U.S. national security, Canada had already set down firm roots. The scale of Greenland's untapped potential is staggering. Beneath its vast sheets of ice lie nearly 38 billion tons of rare earth elements, including niobium, graphite, and zirconium, minerals critical for advanced electronics, clean energy technologies, and modern defense systems. Estimates also suggest more than 17 billion barrels of oil lie offshore. For the Pentagon, Greenland is not only a resource hub but also a strategic blind spot. Its northern coast creates gaps in radar coverage, complicating early detection of Russian submarine activity. In other words, Greenland is simultaneously an economic prize and a military keystone. Trump's insistence on annexation reflected that dual importance, but his approach was blunt, confrontational, and ultimately counterproductive. Greenland's leaders wasted little time in responding. In mid-March 2025, both Nuuk and Copenhagen issued a joint statement rejecting outright the notion of any transfer of sovereignty. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen cut through the noise with sharp words, reminding the world that Greenland had been part of the Danish realm for centuries and was not a commodity up for sale. "It is not for sale," she declared. "And let me put it in words you might understand. Mr. Trump, Greenland is not yours to take." The message was echoed by Greenland's coalition government,
which insisted that future development of the island would be guided by its own people,
not dictated by outside powers. This firm rejection might have left Washington scrambling for alternatives, but by then the narrative had already slipped away. Canada's quiet diplomacy had yielded results that carried both economic and symbolic weight. Greenland Resources Incorporated, a Canadian mining firm that had cut its teeth on molybdenum projects in Ontario, secured a 30-year license to mine in Greenland. Molybdenum, though little known outside industrial circles, is critical for high-strength steel, a material in soaring demand across Europe as the continent pushes to decarbonize its economy while maintaining advanced manufacturing capacity. The deal was backed by the European Investment Bank's Green Fund and supported by Denmark's own export credit agency, giving it not just financial heft, but political legitimacy. At nearly the same time, another Canadian company, Amaroq Minerals, revived the long-abandoned Nalunark gold project with new financing drawn from European and even American investors. In a striking irony, while the U.S. government clamored for annexation, it was American private capital quietly fueling Canadian operations in Greenland. The consequences rippled quickly. U.S. defense contractors, reliant on rare earth imports for missile systems, aerospace projects and next-generation military technologies, suddenly faced new supply challenges. Lockheed Martin was forced to delay testing on its hypersonic missile line, while Raytheon scrambled to secure contracts with alternative suppliers in Australia and Chile. The Inflation Reduction Act, which tied clean energy subsidies to domestic battery production, was undercut by the reality that critical raw materials were now flowing toward Europe rather than the United States. Washington's position looked increasingly fragile, even within NATO. Cracks in the alliance became visible as other members weighed in. Norway aligned firmly with Denmark, pledging to protect Arctic stability against unilateral aggression. France went further, dispatching a nuclear submarine to patrol Baffin Bay, while pledging investment for a new Greenlandic airport, a symbolic show of support for Europe's stake in the region. Poland, wary of alienating Washington, remained conspicuously silent. But Canada, by contrast, issued clear warnings about the dangers of turning resources into instruments of coercion. Ottawa's message was unmistakable. Cooperation would build prosperity. Confrontation would only deepen instability. The Arctic, once dismissed as frozen wasteland, had suddenly become a hotbed of economic and strategic rivalry. Yet Canada's Arctic Hexagon Plan, a network of mining hubs, infrastructure corridors, and energy projects stretching from Baffin Island to Greenland, presented an alternative vision. It was not a vision of conquest, but of integration. Mining ventures linked with European supply chains, LNG plants aimed at diversifying Asia and Europe's energy markets, and space cooperation initiatives with the United States that still preserved Canadian sovereignty. Even as Ottawa accepted the reality of U.S. military presence in the far north, it resisted any unilateral American move that might trigger territorial disputes or undermine international law. Energy, in particular, underscored Canada's emerging role as a balancing power. Cedar Energy, a Canadian firm, began negotiations for a floating liquefied natural gas facility in Disco Bay, a project aimed at serving both Europe and Asia. Germany, still searching for alternatives to Russian gas and increasingly wary of over-reliance on U.S. energy exports, showed keen interest. If realized, Canada's LNG project would directly challenge Washington's energy leverage while offering Greenland an avenue of development less dependent on any single great power. The project symbolized what Ottawa was trying to achieve: practical partnerships that benefited all parties involved. For Greenland, the benefits were immediate. Revenues from molybdenum and gold mining, along with byproducts such as silver and copper, began to flow into government coffers. These funds strengthened the island's ability to invest in social welfare, education, and infrastructure, helping it build a more autonomous economy while avoiding overdependence on one partner. For Europe, Greenland became a crucial new pillar in the Critical Raw Materials Act, reducing the continent's vulnerability to external shocks. And for Canada, the deals represented a breakthrough, positioning Ottawa not just as a supporting actor in Arctic affairs, but as one of the key architects of its future. By contrast, Washington found itself increasingly isolated. Attempts by the U.S. State Department to negotiate joint development agreements with Denmark and Greenland stalled, blocked by a lack of trust following Trump's rhetoric of annexation. On Capitol Hill, opposition mounted. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska warned that aggressive moves in the Arctic risked harming fragile ecosystems while alienating vital allies. Democratic senators pushed for cooperative approaches, arguing that confrontation would only open the door for China to expand its influence. Even within the Republican Party, some lawmakers questioned the wisdom of pouring political capital into what was perceived as an unattainable dream. What made Canada's approach particularly effective was its contrast with Washington's. Where Trump spoke in absolutes, Greenland must be taken. Greenland must serve U.S. interests, Ottawa spoke in terms of mutual benefit and long-term vision. Where Washington raised fears of military confrontation, Canada built partnerships with miners, banks, and pension funds. Where Trump evoked sovereignty disputes, Canada strengthened Greenland's path toward economic autonomy. The result was not just a policy difference, but a narrative one. Canada was seen as the builder, the facilitator, the partner. Washington as the spoiler, the aggressor, the dreamer, chasing an impossible prize. In the larger picture, this dynamic reflects a deeper shift in global politics. For decades, the Arctic was framed as a space dominated by superpowers. The US, Russia, and increasingly China. Yet the story unfolding in 2025 suggests a more complex reality. Middle powers like Canada, working in alignment with Europe, can tilt the balance of power through smart, strategic choices. Rare earths, LNG, and gold may not sound as dramatic as aircraft carriers or missile systems, but in a world where supply chains dictate economic strength, they can be equally decisive. The irony is that while Trump's speeches captured headlines, Canada's quiet deals reshaped reality. As Greenland's economy grew stronger, as Europe's energy and resource security diversified, as NATO found itself strained but not broken, Ottawa emerged as the actor most adept at steering the Arctic chessboard. The Arctic of the future will not be determined by who can shout the loudest or deploy the most military hardware. It will be shaped by those who can build trust, mobilize investment, and create durable partnerships. And so the story of Canada's $3 billion mining deal is not just about Greenland or rare earths. It is about a shifting world order, one where smaller nations with thoughtful strategies can outmaneuver larger rivals weighed down by their own rhetoric. It is about a frozen frontier that has become one of the world's newest hotspots. And it is about the broader lesson that in geopolitics, as in life, sometimes the quietest move is the one that changes everything. So as Washington remains entangled in confrontational posturing and impatient maneuvers, Ottawa charts another path, quiet, steady, and strategic. For Europe, Canada has become the reliable partner that Greenland needs. For the Arctic, it is proof that cooperation and prosperity can coexist with security. And for the world, it raises the ultimate question: who truly shapes the future of the Arctic? Perhaps the answer lies not in annexation schemes or fiery speeches, but in smart choices, mutual agreements, and the recognition that power is not always about who controls the most territory, but who makes the most intelligent moves. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the Arctic is no longer just a frozen expanse at the top of the world. It is fast becoming the stage on which the future balance of global power is decided. And as this story shows, sometimes the players you least expect are the ones who end up steering the wheel.